You are listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with my husband, Steve Worsley, the toxic mold expert and your number one source for mold consulting and mitigation in the USA. Here is episode 140. Are those constant headaches in my car due to toxic mold?
Before we get started on this episode, a short or not so short disclaimer. While all attempts have been made to verify the content provided in this podcast, neither the podcaster or the producers assume any responsibility for errors, omissions, or alternative interpretations of the issues discussed herein. All information stated in this podcast is the opinion of Steve Worsley. Steve Worsley is a mold specialist with over 20 years of experience in the construction and mold industry. The Toxic Mold Podcast is for information sharing purposes only. The views expressed are those of the podcaster and his alone. These views should not be taken as expert instruction or commands. While there may be references to medical conditions and symptoms, all solo podcast episodes are the opinion of Steve Worsley, and any medical questions or concerns shall be addressed with the appropriate licensed medical professional or professionals. As the podcaster refers to different mold types, please be aware that Steve Worsley is not a microbiologist, and questions concerning mold specifics should be answered by the appropriate professional. The listener is 100% responsible for his or her own actions. You can check out Steve's books on Amazon about mold and dealing with mold in your home at amazon.com/author/Steve Worsley. And if you're interested in scheduling a mold consultation, over the phone consultation with Steve, you can be sure to find out more about those and his availability at cnccontractorservices.com. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Toxic Mold Podcast. Steve, we are talking about cars, headaches, and toxic mold.
Yes. Yep. Could be cars, boats, motorhomes, RV trailers, trucks, mopeds.
Side-by-sides?
Yeah. So side-by-side too, yeah.
Yeah. So any vehicle that you use to transport yourself from one place, being on a bus, a subway.
Yeah.
All of those could have mold, right?
Yeah, that's true. You're from the Northeast, so subways and stuff like mass transit, I didn't even really think about. But.
Well, and in New York City, what's crazy is in the winter, you're walking down underneath the ground into the subway, so it's humid down there and wet because everybody has their boots and whatnot on. So that's just a melting pot for mold issues. Down there.
Yeah, and it's funny because, growing up out here in the West, once in a while you would see steam coming from manhole covers. And most people, manhole covers in New York could be many things, but most of the time around here, a manhole cover's for sewer. So It's sewage. The only reason you're seeing that steam is just obviously because it's the air from the sewer's warmer than the ambient temperature. But in New York, like you said, I don't remember what we were talking about. And maybe we saw it on the news, but you were saying like when it rained, water would pour down in them and there's rats everywhere.
Oh, it's
like, wow.
And then, it's freezing when you're outside. So you've got your coat on. You get down to the subway to wait for the next subway. You're taking your coat off. You've still got wet boots. I mean, it's a whole, and then it's muggy down there.
So then you're getting in a car.
Yeah.
Or I don't know what they call
on
them.
The subway and on the train.
Yeah.
And then you're sitting down next to somebody who also has a wet coat, or they're holding it there.
Right.
So there's so many opportunities in a subway.
Yep. And modes of transportation, that's probably be the best way. I probably should have worded it a little different, but yeah, any modes of transportation, you could have mold concerns. So, and people just don't think about it.
Well, and here's my other question. Can rodents cause mold in vehicles? When you have rodents that make a nest in your vehicle.
Yeah, we just had a mouse. We talked about a few weeks ago. I had to YouTube how to replace an O2 sensor because we had a mouse that chewed through the wiring. Mm-hmm. Now, could they cause a mold concern? The only way they really could would be from their urine, but their urine would evaporate fairly quickly versus normal moisture like water. So could they? They could cause defects that could lead to that, but I wouldn't directly connect a mold infestation because you have mice in your vehicle.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So even rabbits.
Right. I mean, it could have led to they chewed a hole somewhere, so water's getting into your vehicle.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So, the secondhand, cause and effect could, but I wouldn't say directly, if that makes sense.
So then,
for a mouse. If let's say you had a dog and you have an RV and you have a dog bowl and he's always splashing it like the puppies do, and they're just dogs. That could cause a problem. Now, a dog is a lot different to me than a mouse.
Well, and there are certain states that are very, very liberal in nature that actually law requires that if you bring your dog in the vehicle and you leave the dog in the vehicle, by law in those particular states, you're required to have food for them in the vehicle and water.
Yeah.
So couldn't that cause a mold infestation if you live
the
in
water
one of those
could.
Really liberal states where they,
Yeah, that, I mean, I don't know why you would take a pet into a vehicle that you know is probably not suitable, but I think you told me a story about someone that had got a ticket or something.
You could have got arrested.
Yeah, it was just crazy.
Whereas here in Wyoming, people they have their dog in the back of their truck. They have them in, and they don't have to have a water bowl outside the grocery store.
We see it. It's kind of sad to read, but we see in the Facebook groups where, a dog jumped off the toolbox on a ranch truck or something. And so, yeah, it's a lot different here. But, yeah, that water, that chronic moisture intrusion from a dog splashing that water could definitely cause a mold issue. And especially, where we live, like, we were just talking about New York, and so I'll ask you a question. I already know the answer to it, but maybe our listeners don't. Is it humid in New York?
Oh, yes. East Coast, yeah.
So compared to here, it's not very humid here. So let's just say you have that dog and you have whatever kind of vehicle, and you always have that doggy bowl, and you have the a container of water, a gallon jug, plus it's humid all the time, and you're really asking for problems. And the humidity, so for a dog, you would leave your windows cracked. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're in a humid place, that humidity comes into your vehicle.
Well, and we've talked about this in a previous podcast, but it's worth saying for those who didn't listen to a previous episode on this, one of the biggest hidden moisture intrusion problems in vehicles are babies and toddlers with their sippy cups and their bottles. Because you're driving, you're not necessarily looking at them, and they're dumping their bottle or their sippy cup wedged in the seat. So you don't even really know unless you've actually checked.
Yeah, when they get a little bit older, it's not, we talk about it in homes with teenagers and eating in their rooms, but you think about, there's different mold types because molds are common. There's different mold types in cheeses and breads and stuff. So there's stuff in that stuff down in between their seats. Mm-hmm. So not only do you have the moisture concern, whatever mold types are associated with cheese or molds like penicillium, that those are going to be more prevalent in the vehicle that wouldn't normally be there, if that makes sense.
Correct.
So you're kind of introducing all this stuff, and if you're, like you said, you're driving. Like, exactly. We live in a day and age where we just want to turn on the cartoons on the TV and let them do whatever they want. As long as they're not screaming, it's okay. They could be dumping their drinks down between the seats, and you just never know it.
Now, this is a random question because it just came to my mind. Can airplanes have mold issues?
Oh, most definitely.
Oh, okay.
But airplanes, we really learned this with COVID that the air quality I'm just going to go off of what the science has told us. And so for any of you out there that don't agree, I apologize. But this is just kind of what I've understood is that the air quality on airplanes is better than most places.
Okay. Because
it's pressurized. They have air filtration systems. I mean, it's pretty high tech for obvious reasons, even pre-COVID. If one person has some sort of cold, you don't want the entire plane or people on the plane to get sick. So yeah, an airplane definitely could. I would imagine, one of the things we'll talk about is how would that mold happen in vehicles? Well, usually it's moisture intrusion through some, maybe the roof or something. Well, an airplane's pressurized, so
Yeah.
if there was a hole in somewhere in that plane, that wouldn't be good.
No.
And my point is they would kind of know because the plane would depressurize.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it could be. I mean, mold could really be in many places, but an airplane, I would say it's not as likely, but you never know.
Well, and I'm thinking more rather than like, let's say Delta, I'm thinking more like people who own their own plane or their own crop duster or their own helicopter.
Right.
That's a smaller plane. Maybe it isn't taken care of as well as
Right.
a major airline.
Yeah. Yeah. And they most definitely could have that. And, a lot of it just depends on the habits of the people.
Yeah.
Delta, they have cleaners come in all the time. And, those are high altitude pressurized planes, whereas a helicopter is not pressurized in that manner. So they definitely could, I don't want to sound vague, but mold can be almost anywhere because it's naturally present. There's probably mold types in space on different planets.
Exactly.
Maybe they could send me up there and I'd figure it out.
Well, and I mean, I think the question is, I don't think a lot of people think that they could have mold issues in their car or their side by side or their RV trailer or their boat. What typically is causing in any mode of transportation, any vehicle, what's causing mold typically?
It'd be obviously the moisture.
The moisture.
Water.
So any kind of.
Yeah. And when I say moisture, most of the time we're speaking water.
Okay.
We talked about bleach and mold, I think last week or a couple of weeks ago, but we talked about how 95% of it's water. Now, juice, what percentage of it's water? I don't know. Kool-Aid, what percentage of it's water? Liquids could be, when I say moisture, liquids is what I'm more or less trying to say is it doesn't have to be water.
Yeah.
It could be a liquid that's Kool-Aid or juice or something like that. And, that's the most likely source is going to be some sort of liquid, which is mostly going to be water.
Well, and what do you say to people who say, okay, fine, but I assume a boat, because it's in the water, is built to handle water in the boat.
Right. And it is, but so the floor of your boat, so obviously our listeners that are familiar with boats, you have a drain plug you put in. That's in the hole that you have a pump that's got like a float on it, a bilge pump that's going to kick on and get the water out. Now, when you're getting in and out of your boat, now if you're like us and you don't do a whole lot of water sports, if you're just fishing, you're not going to see it as much. But let's just say for our listeners that have those high dollar fancy boats with wakeboarding, surfing, all that stuff, you're getting in and out of the boat with wet feet. So then the carpet gets wet. Well, below the carpet in the boat, which is typically an outdoor carpet, you have some sort of wood. And if it's not getting ventilated properly when you're done, then you can have a mold concern. Meaning, let's say you come off the lake, the floor of the boat's pretty wet, everybody was tubing, doing whatever. If you put the cover on that boat immediately, those of our listeners will be like, why would you do that? Well, some people just don't know, but you never do that. And that's why I always leave it open. Now, if you had to close it up because maybe it's starting to rain, you need to make sure, don't wait 2 days. You need to make sure you air that boat out or put a dehumidifier in there. So yeah, a boat. The concern I would have with the boat is, let's just say there's mold spores in that wood that we talked about in the floor. Mm-hmm. Every time you walk on it, you can kick those spores up. And yeah, it's an open boat, but still, you can inhale those mold spores, so it can still affect you.
That's very, very true. And so, obviously, the moisture is an issue. Chronic moisture, whether it's from clothing or shoes or any of the tubing stuff, is an issue. How do you mitigate mold when you find it in some mode of transportation?
So we've actually done mold mitigation on vehicles, and just like on a home, we've got to figure out what's causing it. So you mentioned chronic, activities such as or habits as wet clothing. I don't remember which episode we were talking about it. Oh, it was the traveling one around Christmas, where if you go stay in an Airbnb for a week and you come in, or you're staying at a family member's house, you guys are skiing it every day and you take your wet clothing and you just pile it in the corner, that can cause a mold concern. Same concept in obviously a vehicle or mode of transportation. If you're always just have that pet that's getting it wet, you got to figure out what's causing it, is my point. Is it a leaky roof? Do you always leave your windows cracked? I mean, there's advantages to leaving your windows cracked. Because to me, why do we have the mold epidemic?
Because everything's so closed up.
Exactly. So you got to figure out, obviously, what caused the mold concern. And then you got to go to the mitigation side. As I always say, you have to call a professional or use a professional. Most professionals in the mitigation field, like what we do, won't even do stuff on vehicles. And, we'll do mold mitigation on anything we can if we can do it. But it's a lot more, I'm not sure I want to say complex, but it's the how effective it is a lot more difficult on a vehicle. Because you pretty much have to gut everything.
Well, and I would think it would be much more challenging with this trend that we see where people call it living the RV life, where people aren't living in a home. They're living in a van, an RV, like they're living in it. So that in and of itself makes it very complicated.
Right. Yep. And those are the mitigation jobs we typically see.
Yeah.
It's a vehicle that's obviously worth a lot more money. If you're, if you had a car and it had a mold infestation in it, I would more or less say, how much is that car worth to you? Because you should just get rid of it.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not really worth it. So, if you think about a normal car that has the seats and everything in it, doing mold mitigation is very difficult. Now, if you want to talk about a Sprinter van that they've converted into, they have a platform in there for a bed and they have a little cooking area or whatever, that's a lot easier to deal with. Because, you can pull all that stuff out. It should be replaced, but we still have to clean out the air ducts just like we would have to do for a normal home that has a forced air system. But I guess to answer your question, like, it really depends on what type of vehicle it is, what the mitigation would be involved in it. And it would be difficult, but that's why, going back to what we talked about last week about being proactive, like, you don't have to be mean about it, but, if your toddler keeps dumping their drink down in between the middle of the seats, maybe you don't give them that drink and you explain to them why. Because it's causing a mold concern. And at the end of the day, they're not going to have that Suburban that's got their TV and all the luxuries in it if they keep doing that.
That's true. And isn't it also about people not underestimating the level of being proactive that they need? I just think about like NASCAR drivers. They have what is it?
Motor coaches.
Motor coaches, right? And so you think, if I spend $200,000 on a motor coach...
Well, they're like $2 million, but yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay, well, $2 million. If you spend $2 million on a motor coach, at least in my mind, I would be like, well, it should be mold resistant and I should be able to do whatever I want. It's $2 million. But that doesn't relieve you of the need for you to be inspecting on a regular basis, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you could use that same... analogy on a brand new $2 million home. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be a mold concern. So you have to pay attention because, and I think, I don't want to pick on any certain age groups, but I think we have a lot of people that believe that they can go pay for an $800,000. That's what starter homes are these days. And they don't have to maintain it. There's nothing they have to do with it. And then they wonder why they have a mold concern. And it's like, well, did you do your spring checklist? Did you go up in the attic? Well, no. I paid $800,000. It's a brand new home. So I don't want to say people are lazy. They're just not proactive in the right ways that they should be.
That makes a lot of... So then, given all of that, what's your call to action for people?
So for modes of transportation, honestly, smells. Like,
okay.
We can tell when our dog farts. I mean, you can't tell me you can't get in the car and go... There's a weird, musty, and I'm not even saying a mold smell. Like, did someone leave their French fries in the back seat? Like, you can tell.
Yeah.
And especially something that's especially food that's getting moldy, it's going to have a pretty pungent smell to it that you're going to know like something's not normal in here.
Absolutely. So pay attention to weird smells. Be proactive with checking in on different aspects of the vehicle.
Right.
And should they be doing a fall and spring checklist for their vehicle?
No, but we were talking about the $2 million home.
No, but I was just thinking about it. So really,
not really,
it's just when they smell funky stuff, they should check.
No, and I would say for modes of transportation, let's just say our listeners have an RV and they love to go RVing and they don't live out of it. They just take it up to the mountains for the weekend and they start using it in June and they stop using it in September. For those months that you're using it, make sure you're paying attention. Now in June, when you first get in there, and RV owners, our listeners know this, you de-winterize them. In the fall, you winterize them.
Yeah.
Pay attention. Make sure the roof isn't leaking and things like that. So my point is if it's something that, you know, like a car or your pickup truck, if you live in places like here where it snows, make sure you're paying attention. And on the floor mats, I mean, nowadays we have floor mats that are, I'm not going to say the name brand, but everybody knows it. They're vinyl, plastic. I'm not sure what type of material it is, but it holds all the moisture, just like we bought for most of our vehicles, so that the water's not going right into the carpet of the vehicle.
Exactly.
It keeps it contained. So my point is if you're more likely to introduce moisture in the winter months, pay more attention in the winter months.
That makes a ton of sense. So be proactive, pay attention, smell your vehicles.
Yep. And then take one of our courses. I have courses available. One of them's free. You can go to Udemy.
Udemy.com and look up Steve Worsley and you'll find all his courses.
Yep. So those are, one of them's free. So there's no excuses why you can't take Is Toxic Mold Making Me Sick course.
100%. And you heard it from the expert. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Prevent toxic mold exposure before it gets in your home. Download Steve's free mold investigation checklist at tinyurl.com/CNC mold checklist. Again, download Steve's free mold investigation checklist at tinyurl.com/CNC mold checklist.